Hey everybody, welcome to the second video of this week's module. And so in the first video we covered parallel structure as an essential or basic rule for clear writing. The second rule I want to look at with you is using active versus passive voice. And a couple of caveats. Actually, let's look at some examples first, what I mean by active and passive voice, and then I give you a little bit of some caveats about what this means in science writing. So very simple, basic sentence in English, subject, verb, object. So the example here is Dave Brushaw drove the launch vehicle. Very clear actor, Dave Brushaw, is doing something, driving, to an object, namely he's driving this launch vehicle. The second sentence here is the passive construction of the same sentence, in which the object becomes the center or the subject of the sentence, and whoever is doing the action is sort of in a secondary role. So let's look at the sentence. The launch vehicle was driven by Dave Brushaw. So Dave Brushaw, although taking the action and being the actor in this sentence, is not in the subject. And you want to avoid that as much as possible. The first sentence, most readers respond to much more naturally than to the second sentence. Now there are reasons and there are moments when when passive voice actually trumps active voice, where you should use it, and we'll talk about some of those. But in general, you want to train yourself in your revision practice of your writing to look out for passive construction. So let's look at a few other examples as well here. So another example is this sentence here. Errors were found in the self-audit, but steps have been taken to correct them. We see stuff like this often in the methods sections of research articles, and there might be a place for that in there. However, in other pieces of your writing, be it in a literature review, an introduction, or in a more narrative essay, what the problem with the sentence is that we don't really know who's doing anything. Errors were found. Well, who found those errors? So possible rewrite would be much more active language, which again is the advantage of drawing your reader in much more actively into your narrative and your story. We found errors in the self-audit and have corrected them. Or another version could be, we found errors in the self-audit and have started to correct them. The first version is a little shorter than the second, but I'm not quite sure what the exact meaning of this, of the whole passage is, because I only saw the sentence. I picked it out from a handout I've used in the past. So both rewrites could possibly capture the meaning. But the most important part in both rewrites is that it's we, active, subject, finding or found in the past tense here, doing something. Finding errors somewhere. So an active subject doing an action to an object. That's much more easy. It's much easier to comprehend that as a reader than trying to figure out, okay, they were found. It can obscure meaning, and you might wonder that I've had often students or writers when I work with them in workshops on this topic are like, well, but government and politicians and government writing is all about passive voice. That's true, because often in political contexts it's advantageous to not focus on who's done something terrible, or if it's even the speaker. So let's look at another example from a more science writing context. In a study that features a much longer duration of intervention, it was observed that eating chocolate before exams had a beneficial effect on high school students. So again, it was observed. Who's doing the observing, we don't know. It's a passive voice construction of to observe. So I want to get rid of that. So my first rewrite, and I'm going to show you a second one in a moment. My first rewrite was this: a recent study. So I make the actor the study is doing the observing. We can do that in research writing. We can make an inanimate object like a study or an article to do something. So a recent study that features a much longer duration of intervention observed that eating chocolate before exams had a beneficial effect on high school students. So this is much improved, has much more active tone to it, but I'm still a little unhappy with that phrase that features a much longer duration of intervention. Between the subject and the verb of the sentence, and that can sometimes cause some confusion for the reader when we put something too long between the subject and the verb of a sentence. So I came up with this version. Using a longer duration of intervention, comma, one study found that eating chocolate before exams had a beneficial effect on high school students. So there I don't have to put anything between a study observed, and I use the word found here instead of observed, but you can also say one study observed that, but I have nothing between study and the subject and the verb, in this case find or found, the past version of find. So these are some ways to avoid passive constructions by making them more active. But let's look at some possible reasons why sometimes passive voice is necessary. So, you will not able to completely ever avoid passive voice for the rest of your life, and nor should that be really your goal. You just want to make sure you use more active than passive, particularly in critical moments of storytelling and narration in your writing, where active voice can be your best friend. So here are 4 reasons, and then a small 5th one tacked onto it, but 4 main reasons to use passive voice. One is when the agent is clear from the context. The example here is students are required to take both writing courses. In a more active way would be the University of Maryland, Baltimore requires all students to take both writing courses. That's unnecessary. We know it's the university. The focus here is on students being required, so passive construction is perfectly fine. Another reason when it's a good idea to use the passive voice is when you actually really don't know who the agent is, who the actor is. So the example here, the comet was first referred to in an ancient Egyptian text. I have genuinely no idea who wrote this ancient Egyptian text, so a passive voice here is an appropriate construction. The third reason to use passive over active voice is when the agent is less important than the action. So the example here is the documents were hand delivered this morning. I don't really need to write the bike courier delivered these documents by hand this morning. The focus is on the documents, that they're being hand delivered. So I want to emphasize that. And so passive voice is okay because ultimately who came and who did it is not important. Now again, remember my comment on government and politicians kind of writing beforehand. This is a technique often used by politicians and government officials, even though the reader would like to know who the actor actually was. And so the 4th one, and is kind of a good segue into into why maybe politicians and government officials use passive voice frequently. You want to use passive voice over active voice when a reference to the agent is embarrassing, dangerous, or in some way inappropriate. So this could have some ramifications. Incorrect figures were recorded for the flow rate is the example. So let's say I knew it was my boss, but I don't really want to, put her under the bus. So I'm just going to keep the passive voice and not say, my supervisor, blah, 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 did not record or recorded incorrect figures for the flow rate. So if that's your intention, you're certainly going to accomplish that goal by throwing you under the bus. But if you kind of want to be political about it and sensitive about it, passive voice can be your best friend in that scenario. And then lastly, just briefly, sometimes passive voice helps you with preserving parallel structure. We talked about this in the previous video about structuring things in a parallel way when you have complex lists of things that you are telling your readers about. So let me give you the example here. Local area networks, or LANs, offer 3 major advantages. First, they are inexpensive to run. Second, they can be expanded easily. If you notice, the sentence starting with second has a passive construction there, can be expanded easily, rather than saying that technicians can expand these networks easily. Because what I'm doing in this particular paragraph, I'm trying to really emphasize 3 major advantages of LAN networks. So I want LAN networks to be the center of my sentence, and I can accomplish that by putting them in a subject position. So the first sentence is pretty straightforward, or the sentence starting with first. These networks are inexpensive to run. Second, they can be expanded easily. If it would say technicians can expand these networks very easily, it breaks that parallel structure. So I'm expecting the third sentence to be third or lastly, they are or they something. Again, using LAN networks as the subject of the sentence. Again, it's a quick kind of reference to the other basic rule of clear writing, preserving parallel structure. Passive voice can help you doing that. Any questions, send me an email at imay@umaryland.edu.